Welcome to the Galen Trombley Show. Be sure to subscribe, review, and share the episode. You can follow me on social media at Galen Trombley. I hope you enjoy the show.
Greetings.
Please hold for a very important message.
Light speed sequence initiated.
How may I help you?
Bonjour.
Security breach.
The truth shall set you free. Awesome. It's a miracle.
Stabilize. 3, 2, 1. Mission complete.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Welcome, everybody. Episode 248 of the Galen Trombley Show. My guest today, very timely. We try to bring him on in October because of Halloween, but we are October, 26th today, so this is the closest he's ever been on to the actual big day. Mr. Matt Boire, he is the tour director for the Greater Adirondack Ghost and Tour Company here in Plattsburgh. You've probably seen him walking around. If you thought you saw Abe Lincoln rising from the dead and walking around the streets of Plattsburgh, close, it's just Matt. But Matt, welcome back, and this is always one of my most fun podcasts of the year because you tell a lot of stories, and I like history. And when you start going to the history part, I love the ghost stuff's cool, but I really like the history of Plattsburgh also. But you're full of information, knowledge, and actually one of my out of the podcasts, a lot of people do say how much they like it, kind of going back into like the history segments of it, because I think a lot of people secretly love history. I think a lot of people vocally love history, but then there's people that secretly love it that won't admit it, but they're history nerds.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm glad to be here again. Spooky season is well upon us. In fact, the big day, as you said, is just around the corner. So lots of things going on.
If you had to pick a day of the week, what's the best day to have Halloween on?
Oh, Saturday.
It'd be a Saturday?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And
for sure.
Have you done the ghost tours on Saturday before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Is that like a full, so this year's on a Tuesday, but like on a Saturday versus a Tuesday, like what's your involvement on the day of Halloween? Do you guys have tours the day of? Do you do anything the day of?
Believe it or not, having done these events now for 12 years, we don't actually do anything on Halloween itself because everybody's got stuff going on. You know, if you're a grandparent, you're working with your grandkids. If you're handing out trick-or-treating, if you're handing out candy for trick-or-treaters. Mm-hmm. So everybody's got stuff going on Halloween itself.
Do you think, so when you take like the Irish dance troops locally, like on St. Patrick's Day, they do all these things throughout St. Patrick's Day and kind of like, everybody's celebrating. Ghost tours I would think are more difficult at 12 noon when it's bright out versus like 8, 9 o'clock at night when it feels a little more spooky.
Yeah, it's always nice when you can have the the aesthetic and sets the stage. You can have the lanterns and it's always better in the evening.
Have you guys ever thought of doing something on Halloween?
Oh yeah,
maybe not in the evening, but even just trying to incorporate something during the day.
Yeah, I tried it years ago, and that's how I figured out that nobody, everybody's busy. Yeah.
So, is your busiest days like? Is it the day before, week of? Like when's kind of the
probably just the week of, just building up to it. People always wait till the last minute, but especially if it's on a weekend, it's nuts. A little bit harder if it's in the week like this year on a Tuesday. People have to work still and that sort of thing, but it's always busy.
I would think when you have people that have like costume parties and stuff, and like Olive Ridley's has a big costume party every year, but it's always nice when it's like right before the main day of Halloween. It's cool when it's on Halloween, but usually it's like if it's on Tuesday and you have like your big blowout on like a Friday or Saturday party-wise, it's always cool because the anticipation's there. Yeah. I feel like it's the same thing leading up to the actual Halloween. People want to be kind of like in the mood, but don't really care if it's kind of like Christmas. It's all the build-up, and like Christmas Day is cool, but like the next day you're like, okay, I'm moving on.
Yeah, it's the weekend before, usually, yeah. You get some people that come the weekend after who are busy the weekend before, but
So this year, any new additions to the tour? Any new I guess things that you've tried out this year relative to past years?
Well, I've always got irons in the fire, working on new stuff. But I'm only one person, so logistics sometimes is what it comes down to. Definitely working on some new top secret tours that I haven't revealed to the public yet. But this year, because the weather has been so lovely over the past, season, we were really kind of focusing a lot on the mansion. We were doing tours at the Hartwell Mansion, focusing on that this season, especially since that's kind of got a finite lifetime that we'll be able to host it.
So how often are you doing the Hartwell, and then again with that, have you changed up the tour of Hartwell? Has it stayed pretty consistent, or do you kind of tweak each tour? You know, each week you add maybe a different room or a few different stories here and there.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of an organic thing. It depends on the group. It depends on how much time we've got. During the summer, we were adding a little bit more lengthy, stories and taking people down actually into the basement. This time of year, there's just such a volume of people. We don't really have the time to do all the little nooks and crannies. But it's still a lot of fun.
So how many rooms are in the mansion?
Well, that's hard to say because originally it had 19 rooms. And then the nuns, while they lived there, they expanded it to somewhere around 30 rooms. And now it's less than that because there's been modifications done to the house in the meantime. So you'd probably have to check the real estate listing to get the exact current
I was going to say, I can check all the extras.
Yeah.
Hartwell,
I think it's 10 bathrooms.
So again, I deal, with real estate. When you see these houses when they have that many bathrooms, in my head, I'm like, how many? Like I saw something the other day. They're like 7 beds, 10 baths. I'm like, first off, if every bedroom had a bath, which makes sense, and then you have just 3 other random bathrooms throughout the house, which I'm assuming are probably half baths, like at different floor levels where you don't have to go into the property. But that just seems like a lot of bathrooms. And I've been into homes that have, I think the most might have been 5 or 6 bathrooms. And it was the same thing. Like, we just got a random bathroom here. Like, who's going to use this bathroom unless they're too lazy to walk to the other side of the house? Which maybe, but it just, I always find that bathrooms are funny because how many bathrooms do you need in a house at one time?
There's even a random bathroom in the basement.
You never
looks
know.
like
it's
a closet. And
stairs are tough, right?
You open the door and you're doing laundry. And
so, what part of the mansion's your favorite? And what year was it built?
It was completed in 1873. It's a beautiful, beautiful property. And my favorite parts of it are the original portions of the house. Obviously there's been changes to it made over the years, but the downstairs, the ballroom, the front parlor, the main foyer when you come in, all very, very much original.
Matt, these are all pretty recent photos.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So I mean, it's a lot of like parquet floors
that's actually my stuff on the table there that I use for the tours. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the woodwork here is beautiful too, and
yeah,
is that wallpaper? Kind of like a plaster almost.
Yeah, there's a lot of plaster and lath, a lot of wallpaper. The amazing thing though is that when the nuns lived there for over 80 years, they took very, very good care of it. It wasn't modernized in a lot of ways that would have been detrimental to the original fabric of the house. It wasn't painted and
that's wallpaper.
It is.
Okay. I'm like, sorry, keep going. I gotta ask you before I go past this photo.
So the current owners of the house, as I understand it, the father was an executive for Imperial Wallpaper at one time. So there's all sorts of interesting wallpapers throughout the house.
Wow, this is wild. I mean, the wood itself is beautiful. Like the big wooden doors that swing open.
Yeah, those are 11 feet tall.
That's wild.
Yep. Each one of them weighs, hundreds of pounds, 6 inches thick.
Do you go into this section?
That's the kitchen. Yeah, not so much.
Okay. I was going to say, I'm assuming that's obviously modern.
Yeah.
That's I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
The wood. So is this I know we've talked about before, but the spookiest places you've ever been? Is this considered it? Or have you been, obviously, you can venture out. You've been to Salem, is there places where you're like, that is by far the spookiest, creepiest place I've ever been to?
One of the creepier places I'd been to, I don't profess to be sensitive or anything like that, but one of the places I went to in my travels that you could really get a vibe was the Lizzie Borden house in Fall River, Mass.
Yep.
That was where the Lizzie Borden axe murders took place. And the way that they had it set up, they had the house very much restored exactly like it was on the day that the murders happened. And, this was in the 1800s, but they had cameras. They had police photographers come in and take these huge photographs of the different rooms. So they were able to look at those photographs and exactly recreate. And they've got the crime scene photos hanging on the wall, so it looks like you're there. And the only thing missing is the dead person in the photo. Like, it was very eerie, very eerie.
I think, so when you think of, like, spooky stuff, and last time I think you were on, we had Anna here, and she's just like loves that kind of stuff. And she was going off and like, like feelings and things that people get from that. And I guess my question is, when someone thinks of something that's in regards to the spooky or extra, I want to say extra, what is it called? Spooky or
paranormal?
Paranormal. There, I was going to say extraterrestrial. I'm like, we don't have ET right now. But do you think it's more of a physical or an emotional thing? Meaning, is it more like in the mental state, or do you think that people physically get a feeling and like, oh, like a shiver versus like I'm assuming, or I'm thinking almost like a placebo effect. Like I'm thinking that it's spooky because you're telling me it's spooky. So therefore now I'm like, oh my God, it's spooky. Where it's like, is something, is there a monster under your bed as a kid? I'm like, there's no monster under your bed. But as a kid, you're mentally thinking it. It's not like you feel there's a monster, but it like goes into your head and then you get it into your body. Is there anything that you know of how someone might get spooked? Is it more like hits from a mental, emotional standpoint into the physical, or do you think it comes from the physical into the mental?
Well, there's so many theories. I mean, like you said, there could possibly be, in some cases, a placebo effect where people are in that mindset to expect something. There's this expectation, so your senses try to, fill in. But then there's other cases where, some people speculate that there's more to it than that there's like electromagnetic fields and things like that start to mess with your body's actual, balance and whatnot. And that makes you have this off feeling. I know ghost hunters have done episodes where they had equipment that would search for spots in a house where there would be these electrical fields, and they said that just the point of someone being in that space would make them feel strange because of the the radiant energy, and it could be coming from bad wiring, it could be coming from multiple different Well,
what do you think? So this is what I always feel when we talk about like the paranormal, or you think of like things beyond our comprehension. So there's obviously the idea of death. Like death is all around us. It's, I heard this line the other day. It's basically one guarantee in life for every single person. Like everybody's going to experience it, and basically being born is you're now given a terminal illness, like at the day you were born, which is just life. Like eventually you're going to run out, and so you think like death's all around us. You have people, obviously, it's very big in like the like the Mexican culture. They have a lot of, the Day of the Dead, and they have all these, which is, it's not, when's the Day of the Dead? Is it Halloween or is the day after Halloween? All Souls Day?
I'd have to look.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna look it up, but they really like death is very much celebrated in those communities and in that culture. So you look at that, and you look at, the idea of, kind of like out-of-body experiences. So you think of just simply like deja vu. Like I feel like I've experienced this before, but like I haven't. But I just had one of those. I had it happen twice last week where I'm like, I've already thought about this scenario, but it hadn't happened yet. So then you start wondering like the idea of like other universes and other, how that things are more connected in different, where we live in our universe, but there's a parallel universe, and you start going, what is that, the law of relativity or whatever, or quantum, what was it, quantum
string theory,
string
and you get into that sort of thing.
Yeah, so it starts going out. So there's like, I think there's a lot more that our civilization hasn't even comprehended yet to really kind of identify, even though I feel like we're starting to like go down these pathways that eventually might be scientifically proven, even though right now it's like, is it science? Is it feelings? Is it like just speculation? How does that tie into a lot of like, because again, I'd say the spooky, paranormal, death, ghosts, all these kind of tie together. And then are we experiencing, when people say they see ghosts, like, is that just something in their own mind? Is that because there's people that are doubters, there's people that are 100% believers, and then it's like, well, it's like people that have like, quote unquote died, but then have come back and like can like say this is what I saw in death. So then it's like, wait, did they actually dip into the afterlife and then get revived back into the physical life we know now? So I always like look at these things, and it's weird because it's not really a good explanation, but I feel like all these little moments are kind of like tapping into like a whole nother part of our world that we don't even know exists. It's almost like going through a trap door, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, this was on the other side of the wall, and we didn't even know this was a real thing. I know that's a big all over the place there, but I'm tying it back into like what can be said by stuff like that with like the paranormal and the spooky and the things that you know or what you might connect to, maybe alternative universes or the afterlife or things that we may not have physically firsthand experience, but we're starting to maybe get like little blips on the radar of like eventually we'll connect these dots.
I mean, that's fascinating stuff. I've been into that, into those theories since I was a little kid. People ask me those types of questions, and my first knee-jerk reaction is always, well, I've never been dead before, so I don't really know for sure.
Safe answer, yeah.
There's a famous quote by Mark Twain, and he says, he said, well, I was dead for billions and billions of years before I was born, and it didn't cause me the slightest inconvenience. So, it's hard to say. But if you start getting into the hypothetical and that sort of thing, there's some people that they speculate that we're all made up of materials that's been floating around for billions and billions and billions of years, since the beginning of the galaxy, the Big Bang, beginning of the universe. And they say that... you get into atomic theory where particles attract one another like particles, and they do different things when they're in proximity. So what's to say that if there's particles in you that date back to some point in the early part of the universe, and you're near another person that has some similar particles in them, and it causes them to vibrate when you're near one another or something? There's so many off-the-wall theories. Yeah, it's kind of mind blowing when you start going down the rabbit hole.
So I watched a video, or this was I think it was a documentary. This might have been about a year ago, and it might have been on Netflix. It was about infinity. Did you watch that?
I haven't seen that one.
It was something about infinity, and why I'm doing this, I'm going to try to figure out what it was actually called. But the whole thing so number one, like when you die, you're supposed to, like, most things get reborn in some capacity. So they're saying the energy of your body eventually breaks down, and then it can come back into something else. So really the idea of, like, if you get cremated or just kind of thrown out or decomposed, that your body then goes back into the earth and comes back out as a different energy source. So
I mean, you can't take something and make it into nothing. There's a finite amount of energy in the universe. You can't destroy it. It has to become something else. So if you say, for instance, take a log and you throw it in the fire, the log disappears, it's gone, but it's not. It turns into light and heat and smoke and particles, and so it's become all these other compounds.
So yeah, and so this is it. It's called A Trip to Infinity. This came out on Netflix. I think it's still on. And what's cool about it is, and I'll give you just kind of the brief. It's only an hour and 19 minutes, so it's a quick watch, but it says eminent mathematicians, particle physicists, and cosmologists dive into infinity and its mind-bending implications for the universe. And what they started to say was, again, this is probably more on the particle physicist part of it. They said that when your energy breaks down and you die and your body starts to decompose, however that does, that it goes back into the earth. And the idea is that you were born from the earth and go back into the earth, and that your particles break down and they go in. It could be a tree, it could form a fruit, it could form a bug, it could form so the idea is like, is the stuff that's made in me and in you and in everybody else, is it from billions of other little things, piece of grass, dirt, water, leaf, plant, bug, another person, that they all kind of come together and eventually produce what we have now. And one of the things they said in this, which is a wild, and again, I don't know how long this takes, but they used the term of an apple. They said if you put an apple in a box, a seal-type box, no oxygen, and just left it there, they said over time that apple would start to decay and it would break down. And it would break down so much that the amount of heat, the energy given off by that apple, was some like incredible amount of degree of heat. It was in like an absurd amount. And they said what happens is it would heat up so much that everything would break down, and just the energy would create this heat. And they said what would happen is this apple would break down, create this heat, and then eventually it would grow back into an apple. So, and it's in this documentary. There's like a 5-10 minute little segment on that, and it basically talks about the idea that everything breaks back down. And I don't know why it was a vacuum sealed. Like if that, I don't know. Again, I'm going off of trying to remember this from a year ago. But the idea was at a certain amount of time that apple would break down and then would come back. So if you came back and however long that process took, you would get the initial apple back.
Yeah.
But it went through this entire full circle process to break down and come
mind-blowing.
back. Yeah, and so. And that's when I start looking at this stuff. And I like the idea of science. I was very poor at science in school, but the idea that there's so much more out there to stuff. And then
Sure.
that blows my mind when you think of everything that's had to happen in the universe as we know it to be able to make all these things happen perfectly.
Well, to be able to make you and me,
It's insane.
you listen to people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, and they talk about these incredible,
Yeah.
concepts. And like for example, there are elements of minerals and things like that are in your body, in my body, that were literally created in the heart of a star, like because of the
Yeah.
tons and tons of pressure, and they know through science that that's where those elements originated. So that means parts of what is you now floated around through the cosmos for billions of years before it finally somehow came to this planet, landed on the surface, went through the water cycle, whatever, were taken up by dinosaurs that died, that decomposed, taken up by plants that died, that decomposed, millions of years until it finally becomes you. I mean, that just, it boggles the mind.
Yeah, and I think there's one good and obviously that's like just here on Earth. We start going
Sure.
out, and like one of the there's one video I want to tell you about, and I've mentioned it before on the podcast, but if I'll just say it again. If I've told you already, it's fine. It's worth a second mention. But like one of the things Neil deGrasse Tyson has said before that I've heard is that he said if you go into a vehicle or ship or whatever, and you travel, because this kind of goes into the law of relativity, if you go out at a certain speed, and he goes, you could go out for a minute. But if you're going at a certain speed, obviously that increases the distance. So he goes, go out for a minute, turn around, and come back. You would be gone for a minute. So 30 seconds out, 30 seconds back. You'd be gone for a minute. The Earth, in theory, could have aged 100,000 years. Because you have gone, and now, again, you need a pretty damn fast spaceship to make this happen. But he said the idea is that it's kind of Interstellar. Have you ever seen that movie?
Oh, yeah.
So it's the same concept. Like you go so far out that you age minutes, and then the world is aging tens of thousands of years because of the time compression on whatever you are in space. And that part is mind blowing too.
Oh, yeah.
That things can age faster at different, like everything's not created equal because of gravitational pulls and stuff. And it is wild.
Well,
It's so wild.
If you start reading some of Einstein's theories about relativity and whatnot, I think one of his mind experiments, thought experiments that he would do, he talked something about being on a train, I think. And if you were speeding away from a clock tower on this train at the speed of light, and you looked back towards the clock tower, you would actually start to see the clock running in reverse, because it would take, you were going faster than the speed of light, so the light reaching from the clock tower to your eye wouldn't be able to move fast enough. You would see it moving in reverse.
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of mind bending. It was something along those lines, but you get into those,
It's crazy what those people can think about too.
Yeah.
Like how does that even cross your mind? So this is something I mentioned this before on the podcast, and if you go on YouTube and you type in, what's the name of it? It is Time Lapse of the Future. Have you seen this?
No, I don't think so.
So Time Lapse of the Future, not the soundtrack. Time Lapse of the Future by right here, Melody Sheep. It's been seen by 96 million views from 4 years
Just
ago.
a few.
Just a few, a couple, a third of the U.S. ballpark. so what happens here on this, and I won't do the whole thing, but it's by Melody Sheep. I've watched this multiple times. And it is 29 minutes, and I'll set the stage for how this works. And you're going to notice, and we might let this just roll for a minute and a half out of 29, and you'll get what I'm saying. I'll talk over it, but you'll get the idea of like what's actually happening here and how mind-bending this is. Obviously, this is... So it's kind of got some like creepy like music. But basically, it's got kind of like this visualization, and it kind of walks you through. But it says, what does the future look like? And the crazy thing is, and it says, how will the universe meet its end? So the freaky thing is, and this is just based on modern science and what we currently know, so a lot of this is hypothetical. But again, they're saying how science is painting the picture of how this might work. So it's actually a very visually cool video to watch. But it said, so this is so this is what they say. We will travel through time exponentially, doubling our speed every 5 seconds. So you can think that this video is 29 minutes and 20 seconds long. So they're doubling time every 5 seconds for
amazing.
29 minutes. And which just puts in perspective how long the Earth has been around, how long it will continue to be around. But again, and it says our universe has just begun. So you can see, and as this goes, you'll see the clicker start going faster because it's doubling every 5 seconds. So you can already see how quick it is, and we're 10 seconds in.
Yeah.
We're already up to 2037, 2045, 2050. And what happens is you'll start seeing down below, they start mentioning what's going on with the different times and what's happening. So now we're up to 2100. We're almost to 2200. And again, we are, 25 seconds into this video? And you're going to start seeing how they... Let me see if I can get the closed captions off here. We don't need that crap. So, but you're seeing down below, Earth magnetic field flips in 2900. So then you start going into, like, Hale-Bopp returns. I remember seeing that in 97. Now we're already up to 5000 AD. So, like, you can just see, like, all the crazy things that are happening in Earth, and, like, stars going supernova, Sahara becomes tropical, like, all these wild things that are going to happen in the universe. And you can already see, like, where it is. We're now at 65,000. So, again, we're in 2023. We're now up to 90,000. Now we're up to 130,000. Like, it's just exponentially going faster.
Amazing.
So what's happening, so we're pausing it now. We're at 2 minutes and 5 seconds of a 29-minute and 20-second video. We're at year 284,637. So, again, put it in perspective, we're in year 2023. So the idea behind this is as it goes all the way out and you watch this for 29 straight minutes, it is mind-bending what this universe will potentially could happen.
It's hard to wrap your mind around that kind of amount of time. You know, those big numbers that people throw out, millions, billions, whatever. Say you had a million seconds. A million seconds is 12 days.
Yeah.
If you had a billion seconds is 31 years.
That's wild.
And we're talking billions and billions of years into the future, or it's mind blowing.
Well, and I don't want to spoil it, but the numbers at the end, it's hard to comprehend how many years in the future that is.
Yeah.
So that's why, and basically what I've heard multiple times is that we are basically the flash of light. After effect, flash of light ripple from the Big Bang still to this day.
Sure.
And eventually it's just going to go dark. And that's what happens. Like the Big Bang, it's like, you always hear this, like it's hard to comprehend because it's all we ever know. So like we're complaining that we got cut off in traffic today or someone didn't get my email today, which is wild. And I try to put it in perspective a lot. If you think about this, like, let's say average lifespan, I don't even know what it is, 80 something years right now.
Yeah, sure.
So let's say you're 80 years. Like most people don't even live for a century. And we're talking, and if you go back to like the 1500s, seems like, oh my God, that's ancient. And like 1500s, like they had boats at that time at least. And then you go back to like what was happening in 1000 AD. Like there was really nothing going on. That was really, there was stuff known, but 1000, that's like, in our mind, that's 1,000 years ago, the first millennium. It's like, what the heck was going on back then? It was like, that was so far to comprehend. And then you go back even before that. Like data collections have only been really going on for a little over 2,000 years, maybe 4,000 years tops.
It depends on what culture you're talking about. But
like maybe the Egyptians are a little bit further back and stuff, right? When were the Egyptians? They were before BC.
They were 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. You know, when they were building the pyramids, 4,000 years ago, something like that.
So when you start going back to like, and I think they just found like a saber recently that was melted in an ice cap from like 40,000 years ago, but it had like a point on it. Like it was actually like a spear that someone must have used for animals, but they had already come up with the idea of like a sword, or not a sword, but like a spear. A spear at that point. It's just, it's crazy.
Well, one of the things I like to point out, you know, when I take guests across the Bridge Street Bridge, which is right next door here, you know, seems like a pretty run-of-the-mill thing. People cross it a million times a day and whatever. So we're talking when I'm bringing guests across, I say, hey, do we have any, any geology nerds on our tour tonight? And some little kids always love rocks and that sort of thing. I said, put your hand on this rock right here. I said, not the top. I said, the side. I said, you see these brown stones? These are made out of Potsdam sandstone. I said, these rocks right here are 350 million years old. And
that's wild.
Those, it's all the same type of rock that Au Sable Chasm is made out of, all that brown sandstone. And that stone is older than trees. Trees hadn't evolved yet when that stone was laid down, and it was all put down when New York was underwater, when it was covered by a shallow sea, when it was tropical down near the equator. Isn't that wild? And in some places, especially up around the chasm where the layers of it have broken away from the water action, you can still see ripples in the sand where it's, fossilized and turned to stone.
I know that Isle Lamont, so in northern Lake Champlain, at one point in time, I think was in the Sahara Desert. So they found something. I don't know when it was, fairly recent, probably in the last 20 years or so. Some stones on there that were old stones, and they kind of looked into it and they traced it all the way back. I believe it was to the Sahara. So when the continental drift happened, that was at some point above sea level, and then eventually got. Still is now, but eventually was like sea level one, or no, it was underwater. Sorry, it was underwater, traveled across, and now it's in a lake, but it's above seawater or sea level. I just find that fascinating too, that like the continental drift aspect of how things have broken up.
Oh,
so
sure.
like one big piece of land, and then it started to fizz out, which is wild. It's just like
the state fossil of Vermont is the Charlotte whale.
Really?
Yeah, and it's in the 1800s, like 1850s, maybe 1840s, they were digging a railroad cut in Charlotte, Vermont, and the workers started digging up bones. They said, well, what is this thing? And, 1840s, they didn't know what, they had little idea. So a local doctor came and looked at the bones. He said, well, this is something significant. This is some ancient creature. Well, they started putting them back together, and it was a whale.
That's crazy.
Like something along the lines of like a small whale, that would have been in one of these shallow seas that covered the area during an ice age or something. And so they reassembled it as best as they could, and they have it on display over at UVM. It's called the Charlotte whale.
There was actually, before I dive into this, because there was a dinosaur that was just recently found. Do you see that? This has nothing to do with spooky. I just think we're just going off in history and weird things. But there's a dinosaur bird that was just found. It's got to be one of the ones that is coming up. And it had a wingspan over 30 feet wide. So it was taller than a 3-story building. And I forgot the name. Dinosaur bird, pterodactyl. It wasn't a pterodactyl. It was something similar to a pterodactyl. I forgot the amount of years back it was. I just saw it recently. It just came up. I think it was 40 million years old. Yeah. And the wingspan on it, it was weird. It almost looked like a human. It was imagine like a human with wings off the arm. So it kind of could walk and it could put its hands down where the joints were. Almost had like a
bat.
Almost like a bat, but it almost like an extra like elbow, if that makes sense. So it was further down and it had these massive wings, but when it put its wings out, it was over 30 feet wide, which is 3-story building. And this thing would just absolutely fly. And I know it's similar to these, but it was definitely a bigger type bird that I feel like could just walk also. And I'm not going to find the thing here. I don't want to just harp on what this name was, but it was a pretty wild animal. But it was from 40 million years ago. Yeah, which is insane. And my question I was going to ask you is, do you think Champ or Champy is real?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think...
So if you had to say, like, off the cuff, 1, 2, 3, you're like, yes.
Sure. Too many people have seen too many strange, occurrences over the years. And I'm not just talking about after a couple of beers. I'm talking about real, sightings. In the 1870s, even way back then, it was a known legend. P.T. Barnum offered a reward of $50,000 for anybody who could produce the Lake Champlain monster, dead or alive. So it's always been a bit of local lore, that I've always been fascinated by. They say even Samuel D. Champlain caught a glimpse of it during one of his expeditions down here.
So when you're looking at, like, I mean, photos up here, like, is this one, Basin Harbor, April 1st, they got a year on this. By 92, 600 people claimed to have seen it. Basin Harbor lives across the lake from Basin Harbor, underwater caves beneath the Palisades, which is kind of down by Westport, right? Basin Harbor.
Well, that's on the Vermont side.
But
Basin Harbor.
It's roughly across from, I think, like Westport Bay. It's kind of like Westport
in that vicinity.
Yeah,
maybe,
it's kind of south of Burlington. I mean, that looks like it's a rendering. It's not like a real thing. But the most
best
famous
picture
is this one, right?
Yeah, Sandra Mancy's photo. Yep, 1977, 78, I think. And that was featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, in 92. It's still, to this day, considered to be one of the best pieces of photographic evidence of a cryptid in the lake. Yeah, there
Sandra
it is.
Mancy?
1977, July 5th. Yeah, she just recently passed away. I think it was last year, I want to say. And, I mean, it brought the whole thing back to the forefront again.
But so I'm guessing she took the photo. Has she set, and again, claims they've seen swimming. So that's her right there, right? D. Carroll. Nope,
yeah.
Never mind. It says that my husband wants to post like thing out there. Turn my head and here's concentric circles on the water moving out, and the post was gone. Now posts don't just appear; they float or stick up or do something. They'll just go down. Sightings. Like, I wonder how you get on that.
That's the sign that they have down in Port Henry.
To say that they saw it?
Yeah, with all the different names and dates, people that have claimed to see it. They have a whole festival down there in Port Henry of Champ.
That's wild. And I said,
But some years back, they did a study of the lake where they actually, did acoustic. They had listening devices that they had dropped down under the water.
Oh, yeah.
And they actually got recordings of some sort of they said it was an organic, vocalization of something, a creature of some kind. And they said it was making some sort of almost like an echolocation like whales do. But they said it didn't match any known creature, and they got that out of our lake. So something is down there.
Yeah, Samuel D. Champlain, 1609.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He'd seen at sea. He saw a sea serpent in the lake with large coils and scales that reflected in the sunlight.
Sure. And he was going off from a Native American legend that had been told and retold in their oral history for probably thousands of years before he showed up. So it wasn't something that just came about overnight. This is something that's been handed down for generations.
I always wonder, like, I think it's, like, you see stuff out there and you're like, oh, I think it's Champ. And then, like, I've done it before and you look and I'm like, that's just like a log that's kind of like floating.
Yeah.
Like, you look at it, but it's just like floating. And I think
Sure.
that if there was an actual sea monster, the head would pop up and it would go and dive back down. But I also find it funny if it, like I said, if it's true, it's definitely not something that spends a lot of time above water, which makes sense. There's a lot. I mean, most fish don't go above water. You know what I mean? Like I said, whale will come up and it goes right back down. So it's like they don't sound like these like chilling on top of the lake and just kind of hovering around, like a bird or whatever. So
Sure.
But it's
well, the lake is a lot deeper than most people realize. I mean, it's tremendously deep in some places. Like, for example, just where you cross the Grand Isle Ferry at the midpoint, it's about 190 feet deep there.
Yeah, 400 feet.
Oh yeah.
Deepest point
total.
is just off the town of Westport, but that's where they say that Champ. Well, that's where they're saying ballpark is. Yeah, that's right across the way from Basin Harbor.
Sure.
So
that's deeper than any diver can go, I believe. 400 feet.
Wow. That's yeah. So I mean, is he just one of those? Is he a deep sea animal that just lives down there? And
well, what I'm saying is, like, how would you know unless you sent a submersible down there or something?
I'm surprised they haven't done that at some point.
Yeah, I know that they have ROVs that they've sent down to look at some of the shipwrecks and stuff before, remotely operated.
Yeah. You said the one, the Valcor, right? Right by Valcor. The what was the boat? What's the name of the boat from Battle of Plattsburgh?
Oh, the one from the Battle of Valcor, the Spitfire.
Spitfire. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't remember the name, but they went down and they found a bunch of that stuff. Like,
oh, sure.
So, but that one, I mean, what's the depth there between Valcor and That can't be that deep.
Well, the Spitfire, I think, is closer to it's south. It's near Schuyler Island. I think.
Okay.
I think because they scuttled that. It was damaged during the battle, and they let it go down.
But that one's got to be a little bit like if you're talking 400 is like the Mariana Trench of Lake Champlain,
the deepest point.
Yeah, we're probably looking at, I would say less than maybe 100 feet tops, right in that area.
In the channel?
That's going to be more of a shallow area.
You would think, but with the entire body of the lake forcing through that channel, it might be considerably deep.
Just eroding down over
exactly. Just the lake boring down.
It's wild. I mean, the champ thing is funny, and someone told me that on Vermont they call it champ, and we call them champy on the New York side, which I didn't know if that's true or not, but do you know?
To each his own.
Because Vermont, they're like, oh, it's champ. I'm like, we always call him champy. So
yeah.
I've always grew up as Champy. I've never called him Champ.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody's got their little interpretation. That's how oral histories go, It changes with each telling.
What's your biggest conspiracy theory that you can think of? I don't even know this is a conspiracy theory, but this is more of like a folklore. But like, what's something that you would say, like, I 100% believe that to be true? Like Champ being one of them. Is there anything else that jumps out? Because I always feel like when you start like in your line of business, there's got to be some stuff that people debate whether it's true or not true, because then there's a level of like, I'm sure you get this. There's a level of like, that guy's amazing, and there's a level of that guy's full of shit. Like I feel like that's got to be like part of it when you're telling these stories and people don't want to believe them. But I think the difference is, I'm sure if someone asked you, you can pull out a bunch of research and be like, I'm not making this stuff up.
Sure.
So like then, because most people when they don't like Champ, you're like, well, I see the stories, but like, is that person legitimate? And then they start, like you said, you start sending out sonar and you start sending out these things.
That's why I always pride myself on putting so much research and attention to detail into my tours and the information that I put out to guests, because even skeptics, it makes it a little harder to argue with a story when you're telling somebody a first-hand account that somebody relayed to you that said, this is where I was standing and this is what I saw with my own eyes, as opposed to something that came from my uncle's brother's former roommate that heard it sometime.
Yeah, big fish story.
Yeah. So, it'd be hard to put my finger on one story in particular.
Is there any that you've looked into that have surprised you? Where you're like looking in, I'm like, I don't know if this is actually true, and then all of a sudden you do some research and you're just surprised, like, wait, this actually might be this. Like you got led down a rabbit hole on something that you never expected to find. Was there any moments during any of the tours or research or history where just something sprang up on you? I'm like, wait, this seems like this event happened, or like when you used to talk about you have said the waterway from Hawkins Pond all the way down through the water. You said there used to be big banks on Margaret Street. And
a
how
bridge
there's
there.
Bridge and tunnels and stuff. And like, I never would have known that, but like you doing research, like could have been like, wait, there was water through there? Like, let me dive more into that. Have you had anything that really stands out to you in your research that caught you off guard or opened up a whole new avenue? You're like, oh my God, I gotta chase this rabbit.
Well, it's funny how urban legends start. Usually they start with a little grain of truth, and then the snowball starts rolling downhill. Like for example, I don't know if you're familiar with Valcour Brewing Company, the old stone barracks out on the base. Well, that building was vacant for 50 plus years, and there was always this story that had been told and retold that it was a hospital during the Battle of Plattsburgh, and people said that down in the basement there was a wall that was painted red because the surgeons had operated down there and there had been so much blood spatter all over the wall. The only way they could clean it was to paint the wall red, And there was always this story about this red painted wall. Well, when they were refurbishing the building, they found the red painted wall. Somebody had actually gone in there during the years that the building was vacant and spray painted a wall red just to make the story true, to make it seem like it was true. They'd even put handprints, so that anybody who got in there in the years to come would see this creepy.
Is this it right here?
Red painted wall. That could be it. Yeah.
Is it the Valcour?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. The red painted wall.
But obviously, I'm assuming that paint's a little too fresh to be.
It's spray paint, and there's the handprint. But the funny thing is that once you start researching it, the building wasn't even built until 1838, so it wasn't there during the Battle of Plattsburgh, so that kind of puts a big hole in that story. Usually they don't hold up for scrutiny, when you start doing the actual research. But sometimes they do. Sometimes you do find that little grain of truth that lends credence to the story instead of the other way around.
What's your most surprising Plattsburgh story? Like I said, that just something you never expected happened here, or that just caught you off guard, and all just in research throughout the years.
Well, anytime I reveal something on one of our tours, I usually always make sure that it's something that people can hardly fathom that ever happened right in their own backyard. That's what kind of makes it so fascinating, when you can put people in a place and say, this is what happened right where you're standing. The only thing that separates you and that event is the passage of time. You are on the exact same location, and this is what you're seeing and hearing and smelling if you were there. And so I like to kind of try to fire people's imaginations by that. And for example, right in the heart of, just outside of downtown, where the old Seton Catholic buildings are, the old campus where the Roman Catholic school was. It was MAI before that, but it's kind of a retirement community now. It's called Catherine Gardens. There's apartments and things there. But if you go back far enough into Plattsburgh's past, the townspeople, names change as they do over time. The townspeople, if you ask them, they would have known that was once called Gallows Hill. It was a sandy ridge that ran down through the center of that neighborhood. And that was where they executed a British soldier who was captured as a spy prior to the Battle of Plattsburgh. And, they hung him up on top of the hill. And for generations that followed, local school kids used to scare the heck out of one another by revealing the story of the ghost of Gallows Hill. And they said that they would dare one another to go up atop the hill on a dark and stormy night with no lantern and no light to kind of prove how brave they were. And once they got up to the top of the hill, they had to call out 3 times into the darkness. They had to say the soldier's name, and they had to ask, "For what was you hung?" And they had to say that 3 times. And on the 3rd try, it was said that his ghostly voice would reply to your question, and you'd come screaming down off the hill.
That's, well, I was going to say, like that. And what year was that, Matt?
1814 was the year that it took place. But see, most people would hear that story, and they would hear kids telling that story, and they would say, that's funny. That's kids being kids, right?
Yeah.
Well, fast forward to 1923, I believe it was. 1923, a little bit more recent period of time, workers were breaking ground in that exact vicinity for the new Mount Assumption Institute school building, the building that still stands there along North Catherine. Right off the southeast corner of the foundation where they were digging, they discovered the crumbling remains of a human skeleton. So were the children having, overactive imaginations, or maybe there was something to that? Those are the stories that I love.
Well, I think the cool thing, like, our area is such an old area. Like, when you go back through history, like, it's just
sure.
I mean, old. Obviously, there's been people around for tens of thousands of years. Yeah, but I mean, recorded history, like, we're one of the older ones, and I think that when you start to go back, and again, talking about like connectivity, and I'm looking at one of the names here. Chazy celebrated its 10th centenary. I knew I was going to butcher that. So, Rouseling on July 16, 17, in 1666, the Sieur de Chazy was killed by Indians on the Little Chazy River, and the town fittingly remembered the man whose name today denotes the town. Yep. I honestly didn't even know that's the name of. I'm from Chazy. I didn't know it's not even spelt the same way as it was back then. It's a French name, but Chasy, and he was killed by Indians in 1966.
1666.
Sorry, 1666.
Yeah, he was a Captain de Chazy. He was a French soldier, and he was killed by the natives near the mouth of the river. Yeah, and there's a historic marker there by the little bridge where people fish.
Oh, right by the fire station?
No, by the mouth of the Little Chazy River, like out by Lake Champlain.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's for him. I've
Yeah.
driven. I know exactly where we are now. Yeah, down
Yeah,
by the boat launch.
little metal bridge there. Yep.
Okay, so I don't think again, being from Chazy, never knew that. I know Chazy was founded or formed in like 1804. So if something was 1666, a long time ago, 1666, that he was murdered, then you're talking 150 years later, basically, or 140 years later, the township is formed. What takes it that long, you think, to go from this guy's obviously there at some point, like the town, even though it wasn't formed, was named after this guy? Is it just more of like government-wise, they kind of pulled stuff together, or is that...
Well, maybe they were just looking back at the heritage. Maybe there was a lot of French settlers still living here. I mean, there's always been a lot of overlap. Canada isn't just a line on a map. There were lots of French-Canadian influence here in the North Country, especially considering this was part of New France at one time,
So most of it is just, like I said, when he was around, it was just kind of land. It wasn't like a town.
Wilderness. Yeah, wilderness. Yeah. There were communities, but they were Native American communities. There was actually a native village right by the mouth of what is the Scamotion Creek today.
What was back then? Like, what tribes were around here?
Well, it was the Five Nations. That's what they called
So
it back
was it
then.
so was it a mixture of like Iroquois, or was it Seneca?
Well, they had their
Mohawk?
own territories. Yeah, there's Seneca. I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but yeah,
But it was just offshoots of those major ones. Because I don't know enough about. I mean, you learn as a kid, but like when you have like the Iroquois, is it like an offshoot of the Iroquois? Meaning like the Iroquois.
No, they were different tribes. There's Six Nations. That lived in this area, and some of them got along, and some of them didn't. But they'd been living here for thousands of years.
Yeah, I wonder what tribe was up in this area. Because obviously, when you start going like Western New York, it's still very much influenced by Native Americans. What Native American tribes lived in New York? Little history lesson. I feel like my teachers from... Oh, there we go. Right here? Yeah.
Mohawk. Yeah, would have been Mohawk along the shores of the of Lake Champlain.
Okay.
And then going west, Oneida,
Abenaki.
Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca. Yeah.
Wow. It's always... Okay, so Mohawk. I mean, that would make sense, like Mohawk Valley.
There's still descendants of them living here today.
That's crazy. I mean, that is kind of cool. I mean, every map is the same, so that's obviously very well documented in history. But Mohawk, yeah, okay. So when was, I mean, this said 1720. Is that kind of when the influence, obviously from settlers coming over started? I mean, obviously there was a French and Indian War, and you started having those battles. But like previous to that, when settlers first came over, and I read a book, or actually I'm in the process of reading a book. I haven't finished it because I lost interest in it, but it was really pretty fascinating. It had to be do down more in Texas. They started talking about the Native Americans in Texas, and they started talking about the settlers coming over, and then like obviously they were at odds, but then you had some tribes that were, it was about the Comanche Indian tribe down there, so like they ended up, fought with certain, settlers and fought against different ones, and they were also at odds with each other's tribes, and it's a fascinating history, but I mean, that's still recent history in the United States. Up here, when you start going like the history of the tribes up in this area, how did that start to get to influence? Like, you see like the French come down, and whether it be the Mohawk or whoever that are like guiding them around and showing them around the area. How does that tie into the history of Plattsburgh with, this being a little bit before we started having a lot of documentation from Plattsburgh, like things started to get built up by, the Europeans or anything like that? Well,
there was native settlement, as I said, around here for thousands of years. There was a native village right in the sand dunes by where Scamotion Creek is today, the southern end of kind of what is the city beach. Mm-hmm. So there was communities all down through here that would have traded and had relations with the settlers as the European presence grew and grew. I mean, even Champlain, he wouldn't have gotten very far if he hadn't have made allies with the natives. He even went to the trouble, from what I've read, of learning their language so that he could converse with them.
So Plattsburgh Bay, Adirondack River. So this is the one you're talking about right here. South Plattsburgh, the Sawmill. Am I looking at the...
This is Plattsburgh. Scamotion Creek is north of the city.
Yeah, so this is actually right down the road. So we're right here.
Yeah.
This is actually where we are right now.
Yes, exactly. Right where that sawmill is.
Yeah, I'm trying. So Fort Morrow, Fort Brown, South Plattsburgh, Hospital Stores, Fort Scott.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember you told me that the opening to the mouth was actually twice as big at one point.
It was, yeah. It was mostly filled in by man over the centuries.
So this is the Bridge Street, the same bridge we know now.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be the same bridge? Or?
They call not the exact same bridge. The one that's there now was built in 1930, I think. But
okay,
there's been a slew of wooden and iron bridges there over the years. Obviously, the one during the Battle of Plattsburgh was wooden, and they ripped up the planks to prevent the British from being able to come across. But it was known then as the Lower Bridge because you had the Upper Bridge, which would have been South Catherine, and the Lower Bridge.
Isn't it funny that it's now Bridge Street? Like we don't you just kind of say like Bridge Street, not even thinking about it, but then you actually realize it was just named because it was the street with the bridge over the water.
Bridge.
Like it's very like simple back then. It was like, oh, that's Bridge Street.
Sure,
like,
or Main Street or whatever.
Yeah, because it was like the only street at the time.
I always am fascinated by the way that streets get named. There's a lot of interesting stories in Plattsburgh about some of the streets. Like,
there's got to be a lot of political pull on that. When back then, I'm assuming because there are a lot of names.
A lot of it had to do with who owned the land, who owned the original land or farm that the road was cut through. Like, for example, Margaret Street, which everybody knows, is named for a lady named Margaret Mott Smith. And the Smith family owned a lot of the land. They had a house where the Strand Center for the Arts is roughly today, where the old government building is. And their house was there. And both Margaret and Cornelia were members of the Smith family.
And Cornelia being Cornelia Street?
Yeah.
And Cornelia Smith?
Yep.
Well, Smith is down in the Flats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah,
Smith Street.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, drew a blank there for a second, but yeah. And then, so these maps right here, I'm trying to bring this up. There we go.
Oh, yeah. That's the 1877. Yeah, a little more bustling.
Yeah, so this is the same street right here. This is still Cumberland Ave right here.
Yep. And you can see where we are, right there.
Yep.
By the Bridge Street Bridge.
So some of these buildings are still there. Obviously, that's
sure.
the train station build. No, train station would be down here.
That wasn't built yet. The present train station wasn't built until the mid-1880s.
Yeah, it's 1886. What was this, 18 what?
86, I think.
But this map is what?
This is 1877.
Oh, so, okay, yes. Yep, okay. That makes sense.
Like 9 years earlier.
So this was a rail yard down here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Very busy place. Dangerous place, too.
And this is still the same train track that you were mentioning the other day.
Yeah, the train trestle still crosses where it did. In fact, it's interesting because the original shoreline follows along where the train tracks are today. See? But this is all filled in from here to here where the sewage treatment plant is. That actually was not a pleasant area because in summertime it was kind of this shallow, tepid, swampy area filled with mosquitoes, and people used to dump their trash down there. So over time it started filling in naturally. So when the railroad came in and said, "Hey, you mind if we fill this in the rest of the way?" People were like, "Yeah, that sounds great. Go ahead." If you do any digging down there, like when they dug to build the sewage treatment plant and that sort of thing, it's all bottles and, because people dumped their garbage down there for many, many, many years.
So when you look at I'm looking at the names. So you're talking, again, this is the mouth of the river, what Matt just said. If you go down, like Lorraine Street's still there, Miller Street's still there, Cornelia Street's still there. And again, if you're people from Plattsburgh, you know these streets. But now up here, Matt, way up top, this little section where that bridge is that?
Yeah, that's South Cat.
Is that Perry Bridge now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That would have been known as the Upper Bridge, and then what is the Bridge Street Bridge today would have been the Lower Bridge. Very, very imaginative names.
How hard? What's this little community?
That was called the Flats.
That is the Flats.
Yep, that's the Flats. And
that makes sense. Yes. Okay.
That was a community of mill workers' houses that were down there, very small.
Just like
you
where
know.
Platco is
Yeah,
now.
Yeah,
And-
exactly. A lot of people that lived down there worked in the factories or the sawmills that were down there.
And then what's up here? This little, I think we've talked about before, the oval. Is that a track or a horse track? Way up where it splits off, so it looks. I'm assuming that
up-
is Broad Street.
Yeah, up on Broad Street. There was that was where the fairgrounds were at that time. There was a horse racing track up there, and then later on it was moved to where Penfield Park is today. That was the Clinton County Fairgrounds.
Wow. And then eventually to where it is in Morrisonville now. Mm-hmm. So when this goes up, so if you look at the top here, these roads. So this, what's this road? That's Cornelia Street. Same spot. So
same spot.
So before I go, when was City Hall and when was the monument built here?
Monument was finished in 26, and City Hall 1917 or thereabouts.
Wow. Okay. So when this goes all the way up here, how far up did that go? West, Cornelia Street.
Well, eventually
And then, I'm assuming that's still Ruger Street, right? Up here.
Yeah, those all turned into plank roads that would have taken you out to the west into the wilderness.
Wow. So it just stopped at some point.
Yeah. There was just a few farms, and then it just turned to nothing.
That's crazy. And, I mean, it wasn't until the addition of the interstate highway that would have all grown out west, right?
Because there wasn't a whole lot where Route 3 is today. That was farms.
Yeah.
It was all farmland.
And we're still starting to see that turn over. Like you go down like Tom Miller Road, there's old farms that are starting to see commercials. So like you just see the wave. Like if you were to pull back and just hit like fast forward over the last like 50 years, you would see everything just build up so quickly.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen like time lapses of like New York City and how much that's built up. And
I can remember when I was a kid, right where the entrance to Consumer Square, Walmart, all that, right where that big sign is, there was a barn there. An old, barn board, wooden barn.
Wait, so what year was that?
Whenever they built Consumer Square, they tore it down.
Probably in the 70s, early 70s?
No, it was more recent than that.
Really? Wow.
No, I don't know the exact date, but I know it was, I've only been around since 82, so I'm not,
Well, so the other thing too, Matt, when they pick City Hall, like how do they decide on City Hall? Like where they put City Hall? Like, do you know the history of it?
Yeah, there was at one time there was a livery stable there for horses.
Okay.
Right where City Hall is today was a horse barn. And they were just able to basically buy up that whole block and tear down all the buildings and say, well, this is where we're going to put it. Same with where the McDonough Monument is today. Where the monument is, there was a whole string of buildings along the embankment there, everything from a movie theater to, shops, and they tore down the whole block.
And just opened up to the park?
Made it a park and built the monument there. Yep.
So all the houses that are on Margaret Street right now, because I'm looking at this and I think I'm looking at the right street. Sorry, I got this like zoomed in, so it's
sure.
Let me just do that. This makes it easier. This right here, is that Margaret Street or is Margaret Street? Margaret Street's the next one up.
Margaret Street is this. This is what's Durkee today.
Gotcha. So all these buildings right here, are those the one? They're not still. Those aren't the ones that are still standing.
Many of them are. Yeah.
Same ones.
Many of them are. Yeah. You got St. John's Church. This is the Witherell Hotel. That's long gone.
And that's kind of where the Strand is now.
Yeah.
Well,
this
just down
this
from the
building
Strand?
right here is where the Strand is today.
Okay, so that's actually where the parking lot is. The new parking lot. When they tore down the old building, Glens Falls National Building, it's ballpark.
This is where the Witherell Hotel was.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, this one right here.
And when was that torn down?
69.
Oh, that wasn't
closed
long ago.
in 68. Yeah, and that had been there for almost 100 years when they tore it down.
And that also puts things in perspective. Like I've never even heard of that before, and that was 50 years. That was 20 years before I was born.
Yeah.
And that had been up for 100 years. I never even heard about it. So like you see, like when things change in history, it
sure.
just becomes a speck in the time. In time.
Well, here's a good story about that. There is a corner of Broad and Stelzer today.
Yep.
The road that goes to the cemetery.
Yep.
Right? Well, for generations that grew up in Plattsburgh, that would have been known as Winchell's Corners. And everyone knew that that's what it was called because there was a house that stood right next to where the corners are today that the Winchell family lived there for generations. So if you said to somebody, hey, you got to take, Winchell's Corners, they knew what you were talking about because everybody knew everybody. That's how small the town was. But it took on a bit of a more kind of a sinister notation because since that was the road that went to the cemetery, if you had a friend that was, say, sick, not doing well, say, oh, how's he doing? So, oh, he's about to turn Winchell's Corners. That means you're going to the cemetery. That's what that meant. So that was a phrase that if you said that in conversation, everybody wouldn't get the joke and they would know what you were talking about. But if you said that today, nobody would have any clue what you were talking about.
And that wasn't long ago, right?
Yeah, 1800s, early 1900s, something like that.
Yeah. Well, and that's when you take when you go back to the 1920s, 100 years ago, or 1923. So think about all the stuff that happened in 1923. It was 100 years ago, and there's very well recorded history then, and like how many things have changed since that time period. And who was president back in the 1920s?
Early 20s.
What?
There was Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge. Were in there.
So you think about like those guys in history, like that's 100 years ago, which wasn't that long ago. When you start seeing like things that were happening and it's just again kind of going back into like 100 years ago was a snap of the finger, and all the stuff that's happened since. And you go back to then, like some of the stuff, it's so quick you forget about things.
Sure, my grandparents were born in the early 20s, and they haven't been gone really all that long, and. But now you talk about somebody from the 20s, they'd have to be 100 years old to have lived during that time period. It's funny how time goes. I'm sure that when I was little, I probably met people that were born in the 1800s and didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're right.
It's crazy.
When was the telephone invented?
Late 1800s.
There was something I read the other day that said that someone right now, and I forgot what the technology was. They said they saw the invention of this, and they saw the invention of basically like the smartphone. And I forgot what that thing was. I thought it was the telephone, but it was something else. Might have been like wireless or wiring stuff or communication. But they said in their lifetime they lived through the invention of that to the invention of the iPhone or the smartphone.
Yeah, what's mind-boggling is since the Industrial Revolution, the progress that we've advanced at the pace has been greater than I think at any point in human history that I'm aware of. I mean, people were carving stone for thousands and thousands of years. Yeah. And here we are within the span of a person's lifetime. You go from the Wright brothers in 1903, we're walking on the moon 60 years later. Yeah. That's crazy.
Well, and I think, and that's why things that fascinate me, like when you, again, I'm early 30s. So if you think from the start of when I remember stuff still before all the technology, like the big jump in technology. And I'd say the big jump in technology started coming probably like the mid to late 90s when like internet and everything started to get more connected.
Sure.
So remembering that time period and now thinking about how archaic that felt.
It's so antiquated.
And it's not that I'm like, I don't feel that old.
I have a 12-year-old. Try explaining to a 12-year-old what a TV guide is and what that was for.
Yeah.
No, if you miss the show, it's gone. You can't watch it again. It's just gone.
Well, now my kids see commercials and they're like, something's wrong. The TV. I'm like, that's a commercial. It was funny actually. Last night, me and my wife were streaming this show and it was on. I think it was on Hulu, and I don't watch Hulu that often, but it came on, and there was probably 3 commercials during a 30-minute episode because they pulled it off of like FX or something. And I remember sitting there and be like, just hit the like skip, and you couldn't. And we're both just sat there and we're like, this is really weird.
Now what do we do?
And it was weird because we're now so trained that we're just going to watch a show without commercials, and then we're sitting there like, we'll just hit skip. I'm like, we can't. So it's like, okay, what are we doing? And she like went on her phone and I had a book next to me. So I actually was like reading my book for like the 2-minute commercial. And it was just, it's funny because I had a moment yesterday. I'm like, I feel like I just went back to like my 10 to 15-year-old self and started like, I'm waiting for the commercial change. I'm running to the bathroom. I'm getting some food because commercial's on.
Yeah. When I was just telling my son the other day, when I was in elementary school, Oak Street, the school district didn't have enough money to buy computers for all the schools because they were so expensive, you know? So they fitted out an old school bus and they built basically desks inside of it, and they painted the thing orange, and it was the computer bus. And the computer bus would come on certain days to your school, and everybody would come out of the classroom, and you'd go up on the computer bus and sit.
So it went to different schools.
Yeah, it would go to different schools in the district. And it was, I don't know how long it was around for, but I distinctly remember being excited to go up on the computer bus.
That's why, I never heard of that. Probably 80s?
Yeah.
You said elementary?
Yeah. Mid 80s.
Yeah, because now kids, I think kids, my kids aren't old enough to have this yet, but like most kids in some schools have like tablets and laptops and computers like at their disposal. Like, again, we had a computer lab. Like, you went to the computer lab, and I remember the first one I had was one of the original Macs. Or the original Apple Mac, and then they ended up, I want to say like late 90s, 98, 99, something like that. They ended up buying the Mac. I forgot the name of it, but it had like the different colors on the back.
Oh, yeah, the see-through panel on the back.
And you could see all the gears and stuff
Love
in
it.
And I actually, this is kind of weird. I took a photo of it. We went to a house. This was probably about a year ago. I showed this property, went and looked at it, and the house itself someone had one of those computers sitting on the countertop.
Still.
And it was actually down on the base. And I remember looking at it, and I'm like, I haven't seen this thing in almost 20 years.
It's a museum piece.
Yeah, and I ended up taking a photo of it. And now, me looking at it now versus a little kid, it's way more interesting because I'm looking at it, I'm like, how was this made or built? And of course, as a kid, you're just like, oh, screen, blue, green, whatever in the back. And you didn't really put much thought into it. And now you're just looking at all like the processors and all the little things they have. And now it's like, think about this flat screen TV or this laptop or your phone, like how small things have gotten.
Oh, yeah. Like,
I carry this around my backpack all the time. Most people have a phone basically growing out of their arm now, but it's like, it's small, it's convenient. You can do everything you want on it.
Yeah.
And I think they said now, like, your phone has more capacity than what I think I think they said like what Ronald Reagan and Clinton had. You have more power on your phone than they did at their disposal.
Yeah,
period.
yeah. You see the pictures sometimes people will post that it shows, a camera and a video recorder and all these devices in a huge pile. It says, these are all on this now. It's just in your pocket. The sum of all human knowledge is in your pocket at all moments.
Well, that and when you look at how many companies have become obsolete just purely based on like a smartphone.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I'm just going to play a smartphone. It's like, well, we have flashlight. Well, we have music. We have measuring device. We have... you name it. It's like, the weather, there's so many things you pull out. It's a Swiss Army knife. So it's like,
my mom had a camcorder, one of these big giant shoulder held things, and that's all on your phone now. It's
and way better. And now we start going through how you can filter stuff and how you can just like design stuff on there. And it's just crazy. Now, when you have stuff like AI coming out.
Yeah.
So actually, I want a question for you, because I've asked some people about AI and I don't know enough about it to be dangerous. But if you look at stuff with AI, what's the chances that we start to use AI to relive history?
Well, that's an interesting concept. I mean, I think once we start opening that box, I mean, the sky's the limit probably with what you can do with it. Like you said, I don't know a whole lot about it yet, and it seems to be very early on in the development of that kind of technology, but it's pretty amazing once you start thinking about possibilities.
Because if you I'm just going with the idea that AI, they take pretty much everything that's on the computer. I mean, it's funny now when you 0.44 seconds, they brought up 718 million search results for computers through the years. Like, I typed in that. So it's just insane of like what would be on there. But if it had access to all the knowledge that we have in computers and basically through human history, and AI is able to generate that means they could flip through every article. They could flip through every speck of history or note of history that we could create. They would be able to create, if we said Plattsburgh, you could create the entire Plattsburgh landscape to the point that with everything that's ever been recorded in human history.
Yeah, and then with VR, you could walk around in it.
Yeah, but you would know the sounds of people. You would know, and even if you're like, well, I don't know what the Platt brothers sounded like, and they'd be like, well, based on that time period and other things and blah blah blah, this is probably what they sounded like. And next thing you know, you're like walking down the street and you're meeting them, and then you're meeting, and I think that will happen at some point in time where you put virtual reality and you can walk through the city of Plattsburgh and be like, wait, where is where's that street? And like, oh, it wasn't built yet. Like, you got to go around the long way kind of thing. And I think that will happen. And I think that's going to be like, imagine kids learning about history by putting goggles on and like walking through, you know,
like
the
a
Civil
holodeck
War.
on Star Trek or something.
Yeah, like,
you know.
okay, you're going through Gettysburg right now,
Yeah.
and you're physically watching all the action happening
Sure.
through all these accounts, but you're able to see it almost firsthand.
Yep.
I think that's going to happen.
Oh,
That's
amazing.
super trippy.
Amazing.
And it'll happen in our lifetime, which is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
You're going from computer buses to you're now walking around
to
Gettysburg.
Terminators.
Yes.
Then it becomes self-aware, and then we're all, you know,
Well, that's
in big
how,
trouble.
that's how I think they say it's going to end. But I still think that, I mean, with how much has changed in 30 years, and it's only going to compoundly or exponentially grow, that let's say, God willing, I'm another 50 years to 60 years of my life, maybe 70 be cool. I want to live to 100. But if I had 70 years of my life, like, and I've already seen this much change in 30-something years, how much more is it going to change in 70 years,
Yeah.
even though it's going to be at a faster clip?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that video I just said. Like, everything's just doubling time, speed. and
exponentially multiplying.
yeah, so it's like, I think that what we could see coming down the pipe in just from a history standpoint, I think is a wild time.
Yeah.
And I think, but then it makes you like rethink stuff. Like if you were, you know, giving the ghost tours, could they somehow bring up like where you walk through and actually see like, oh, hey, John, that's the guy that actually is the ghost now. Like, but you get to see him back then. And then you like, I don't know, ask him like, are you still around? He's like, yeah, I'm the ghost. Like, imagine if it was like a nonchalant thing. Like,
sure.
yeah, and he's actually not that spooky. He just,
No.
he wanted to get some food or something. I don't know. Like, it's just that idea of like,
Possibilities.
it's crazy. It's really crazy.
Yeah.
So, Matt, we've kind of gone in, you know, we've gone into the future a little bit, but from which again, I just find this stuff
We've
super
been traveling the Milky Way here.
we're going all over the place. Yeah, I mean I get lost in like space stuff, and I get lost in like a lot of these like thought provoking things of like, could this all happen?
Oh, sure.
Because then you start going like the time travel.
Love it.
And I think, and that's obviously a way to time travel, but is there an actual point where people can physically get in the old time machine and they can go back into the age of the dinosaurs and physically be there? I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, some people speculate, you know, you want to talk about conspiracy theories. People say that extraterrestrials are actually us traveling back from some distant future, you know, to visit and observe the past. I mean, who knows? But that's one thought.
It's pretty wild. Do you journal at all?
Not too much.
No? Do you, because obviously you do a lot of research, you do a lot of reading and stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't know have you, like,
I do a lot of writing in margins of books.
Yeah.
And making notations and that sort of thing.
So, like, when I read, I'm reading a book right now. Actually, I had a couple minutes before you got here, and I was just reading, and I underline stuff on almost every page, or put a note down, or jot a thought down. And how often do you go back and reread stuff that you go through?
Oh, a lot. Yeah, because you know, when you get to be a certain age, you start to lose stuff out the other side. But no, seriously, I always like to refresh, and you know, especially sitting dormant during the winter months. Usually, I like to have a refresher when I go into the tours in the spring, and there's, you know, different volumes that I brush up on and that sort of thing.
And do you, so like, so last year I made a goal to read a certain amount of books, like a number book. It wasn't like quality, wasn't anything. It was just like, I'm going to read this many books. And I tried to pick like decent books or books I heard that were recommended or things I was curious in. And then I found that this year I've fallen into, I'm reading, I think, just as much, but my book total, like last year I read 60 something books. My book total this year might only be 20, like I'd say around 20. But I have a lot of books that I got halfway through that I just stopped because I lost interest. Or I was like, I went through it. I'm like, you know what? I'm not getting as much out of this book as I would like. And based on wherever my interest lies at that point in time, I'm going to now pick up this book and start reading it. And I find that even though I'm not collecting numbers of finished books, I'm finding that I'm able to read stuff I really enjoy. And I'm actually enjoying it more than I did last year of trying to get through books. Because then I felt like I was trying to reach a number, and now I feel like and I kind of pivoted about midway through the year, and I'm pulling out books that I've already read, and I'm skimming through them, and I'm actually rereading my notes in the books. So I've tried to go a little bit more quality over quantity, meaning like, let me just keep dissecting the books that I got a lot of stuff out of. And most of my books aren't like a lot of history books. They're more like, it could be personal development, or could be a topic that I have interest in, or something I use for, business or life. But I'm finding like going deeper on those books and really trying to understand the topic and really trying to apply the topic versus pulling out something new. And you kind of bounce back and forth. Are you that way with history books where you're like, I could read a large quantity of books, or I could go very deep on a select few to the point where I almost can breathe and live what's in those pages?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, on certain topics that I'm researching, I just love to do the deep dive. Even if it's something that I've reread, you end up seeming like you're adding more layers to your understanding, or oh, that's how that was set up. That's how that building was located on this spot. And, and then as you find different references that, show pictures or things like that, you start to develop in your head almost like a visual depiction of what the city was like at a certain time, or things like that. And you can utilize that in your tours to kind of paint a picture for your guests, in their imagination.
How have, based on your research, and again, this is speculation, but how different and how similar are thoughts of people from back then to now? Like when you look at the books from the, let's say the 15, 16, 17, 1800s, and what they were doing and what their thoughts were, and kind of, I mean, obviously you have a little bit of a cheat because you can see what their efforts have yielded over time versus what you feel like today's society would think or do, or decision making. Like, has there been much change, or do you find that like it's pretty similar to how we would think now, just given what resources they had at the time?
Well, I mean, social constructs are always changing, and fashion, obviously, you can tell changes over time. But what you find, especially if you start reading old journals and diaries and things that people kept on a daily basis, people are always people. You can really relate to some of these folks because they all have the same emotions that you and I have every day. They still, worried about their kids, stressed about their jobs, all those sorts of things. So they still had the same motivating factors. It's not that far removed.
So I'm reading, and this is, I'll come full circle here on this thought. And I want to hear, because you have read both and a lot of history stuff. So one of the books I'm listening to it because I like listening to like sometimes history books more as like a story. So I'm listening to the new Elon Musk book by Walter Isaacson. Now, Walter Isaacson has also written some other really high profile, but good bestseller kind of books, including Einstein and Steve Jobs and Leonardo da Vinci. And so he's got, I think, Ben Franklin. Those are kind of his main ones. So I read an article recently of someone that was kind of giving a review or a critique of, and it's a fairly well-known author, but giving a critique of the book and just kind of giving their opinion. And the opinion on the book was like, this guy is really good, this Walter Isaacson guy. And so when you start going through, and I think he was an old editor for Time Magazine or something. He had some, there was some, he's a fairly well-known writer, at least in that sense. So what happened was I feel like the critique of Elon Musk was very critical, and then he got a lot of praise for, I think it was like the Ben Franklin book. And not that I'm saying the opinion, it's this guy's opinion, which is fine. But in my head, I'm like someone that read, because also I think this is one of the only books, maybe Steve Jobs, where he actually spoke and spent time with the person he was writing about.
Sure.
So when you go back to like a Ben Franklin, and
you could spend time with him, but he wouldn't be saying much.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, but if you go back to like a Ben Franklin and we're able to walk in his shoes and talk with him and go to the restaurant or go to a pub and have a drink, or see him in his office working, or ask him his thoughts on something, I'm sure this author would have maybe a more critical view of that, because I feel like a lot of people are critical of people that we currently see because we get the good and bad, where some people from history I think we put up on a pedestal because what is outstanding is oftentimes what's survived.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it's like anything else.
Well, it would be interesting, like what you had touched on with AI technology. Mm-hmm. You set some computer on a task of looking through literally everything that Franklin ever wrote, his letters, his personal, build up some sort of AI personality of Franklin that's been generated that you can talk to and have an interview based on everything he ever wrote. This was what we think he was like. You know, that would be amazing.
Because I've noticed like stuff in the book with Elon Musk, and for the record, like I like Elon Musk. I just like people that are innovative and visionary. And like, is he an odd guy? Yes, because you got to be if you're at that level. Like I just think like you're so extreme that anybody that's really on the outlier cusp of anything in life has sacrificed so much. I would put quote normalcy in life, meaning they're just all in on these things that they're going to be off balance. So but the idea is that you're experiencing this guy's extremism, but then you go back to like Leonardo da Vinci. Like, what was his extremism like? Because he wrote autobiographies on both of them. Mm-hmm. But you don't like you could have sat around
missing pieces there.
Yeah, but you could have sat around with Ben Franklin again. While you're having a couple drinks and he's discussing stuff with work colleagues, and you're like, God, that Ben guy's an idiot. Like, but I mean, you could have that, or like, man, he seems like a prick.
Yeah.
But we just know like all these inventions, like, oh my God, he was great, and all these great stories. Where I'm curious to see, because history over time, you either like trash someone or you preserve someone based on what's allowed out. And you got to think like nowadays it's harder to be PR cover up because of the internet and connectivity. Where back then, if there's something said about Ben Franklin, not many people would have known about it. And I'm sure he had the way of getting rid of any evidence. Where someone like an Elon Musk, it's like, well, someone said something and it wasn't even true, but now it's taken as out of context, and now it could be true, and now it makes him look bad. And so and this has nothing to do with the two gentlemen. It's just more of the idea of like, I feel basically what it comes down to is if you know somebody, I feel you can be overly critical versus someone in history, because history
there's a bias there.
Correct. And so that's always why I'm wondering, have you found that with historical books where maybe someone that you have read has sounded like this awesome person, and maybe someone more recent times in history, like because they've, they might still be living or recently passed, so you're like, that was kind of a bad person. But then I'm like, well, was the other person 200 years ago also a bad person? Just we're getting them in different time periods and contexts based on what has lived in writing.
Yeah, that definitely. I mean, you could definitely apply that to history. Even local history, you read accounts that people have passed down of certain events that took place, and then you read conflicting accounts. History was written by the victors.
Yeah.
So you start reading articles that appeared maybe in something to do with the Battle of Plattsburgh that appeared in a British publication or something, and it's a totally different context. Mm-hmm. So it all depends. There's definitely a bias there that I think you would be hard pressed to find in today, when people can check and double check sources at the flip of a thumb.
Have you read any books from I'm going to say the Battle of Plattsburgh time, just because that's a pretty significant point here, that were written at that time period? So they were firsthand accounts?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So how do those read versus maybe someone that wrote a book 20 years ago about the Battle of Plattsburgh?
Well, it's always best to go back to the firsthand accounts, mm-hmm. primary sources, because people that, like I talk about the ghost stories, people that saw things with their own eyes. I mean, yeah, there might be some degree of embellishment, but for the most part, it's going to be a lot more closer to what took place than somebody recounting an event 100 years down the line. So there's been a lot of cases where I've found contradictory stuff, that people wrote later on that, now that we have the internet, you can check multiple sources and maybe it didn't quite happen that way. It makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, because that would be different, because that'd be like Walter Isaacson and Elon Musk versus like someone that might have wrote something with Ben Franklin, sitting at the same table, talking to him, following him around, how he interacted with employees or interacted with townspeople. And I'm sure there's probably some type of book out there that was written about Ben Franklin when Ben Franklin was still alive. Maybe by himself. I don't know.
Sure. I mean, people write newspaper articles and that sort of thing. And sometimes they were critical. I mean, sometimes they said, if they had some personal beef, they would print horrible things about people in the newspapers back then.
Yeah, and that goes back to the human just being human.
Yeah,
like people have the criticism, people have good, bads, people point fingers or take accountability. So
Edgar Allan Poe, after he passed away, he had a grudge with this editor, and he slanderized him all up and down after he died. So there wasn't a lot of people to say, no, that wasn't the way it was. And a lot of what this guy said that was actually falsehoods ended up being recorded in some cases as actual history.
Yeah, it's funny how history works. I mean, do you take into account any of that when you look at history of that
human element? You always have to.
Yeah, like that person probably could have had just think about like simple as government now, or even like local government. When someone has an issue with someone we see it in Plattsburgh. You have someone that has an issue with someone because they disagree on something, and it's like a small petty thing, or whatever. Maybe it's a big deal, but whatever. It's just at the end of the day, it's just like a small little like disagreement. But that could change the course of history based on that person's opinion and how it's reflected generations down the road. Mm-hmm. And obviously, like nowadays, it's probably not going to carry as much depth as it probably did 200 years ago, when there was only like one or two opinions that probably came out of that time period.
Yeah.
Nowadays you go back and you're like, what were all the tweets like, back then? And then you kind of have a better, more holistic perspective of how people were saying it. But now regarding tech, I want to go back to technology. Like technology and history, how has technology helped history, you think? Maybe in what you do, or do you find that, like, is it better for the internet? Do you find that books are still your best source of information, or articles, or just letters? I
mean, the fact now that you can record things in real time, and you can go on YouTube and watch an event from 20 different angles, whereas in history you don't quite have that that luxury. I mean, you can get 20 different descriptions, but maybe you might
or you get the one still photo of Champ when you could have had a whole video.
Right. Yeah. We still haven't gotten that. I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely a lot different. You got to be a lot more discerning with in regards to history. Whereas today there's so many primary sources. I mean, just for example, the mass shooting that has been playing out in Maine over the last 24 hours. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're familiar, but there were people on TikTok last night posting videos. They could hear the gunfire in the distance.
Yeah.
And they said, is this what I think this is? Imagine if that was happening in the Revolution, and people were, is there a battle nearby? And they're posting about it in real time. It's crazy. The one thing though that makes me wonder, people don't make things into hard copy today like they did back then. Like if you're taking photographs and it's, 1850, that's something that's precious and it's treasured by your family and it's rare and it's handed down, whereas today we're taking hundreds of photos on our cell phones. But what happens when that cell phone falls apart in 10 years?
Yeah.
I mean, nobody's going to go to an antique shop looking through old cell phones, for old pictures. Yeah. There's no hard copy. It's just gone into the ether.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you hear that the cloud and stuff. What happens if the cloud goes away?
Yeah, I mean,
which could happen.
Well, technology doesn't stay around forever. Mm-hmm. There's stuff that came out 10 years ago that's not supported now. You try and plug it in, it wouldn't work. So it's crazy.
Speaking of Ben Franklin, do you think like Ben Franklin would have been like tweeting? Like I would think so. If you take these guys and put them, but I'm just saying, like in general, if you took people from history and pulled them into today, and you're like, man, George Washington was this like stoic figure and he wanted to do that. And next thing you know, I'm like, oh no, he's doing TikToks, like, because it's in and it's popular and his publicist told him to do it because he thought it would be like hip. Like, but I mean, because everybody's
it would be
human.
Interesting for sure.
Yeah. And I would say like, yeah, like if we're like all the stuff we do now, like we drive cars, like he would drive a car. He wouldn't ride a horse. I know it sounds like funny, but when you really pull it in and you put it in perspective, then you're like, and I had this conversation last podcast with David, and basically it was the idea of like trying to humanize people. So when you think of someone on a pedestal, humanizing them down to the fact of like they do every single thing that we do. Like they put their socks on, they cut their toenails, they brush their teeth, they and I use like they I don't know why I'm using toe analogies. They stub their toe, but like all these things that they laugh at dumb jokes. They laugh
Sure.
at a stupid meme, like. And I guarantee you, like going back in time, like those people would just say the same thing. Or if you're intimidated by a person, that if you kind of imagine that person as like at the end of the day, they would rather laugh than be like in a serious conversation. They would rather do something fun than possibly work or do like. And you start to humanize the person, and it's like, oh, they're not that scary. And or if you go back in history, I'm like, yeah, they did some cool things, but there's people nowadays that are doing cool things, and they're probably at the same level. It's
Sure,
just they've had years of this like aura built around them.
Also, it makes me think of what's the flip side of that coin. You know, there's lots of villains through history. What if they had access to technology, like
Absolutely.
like an Adolf Hitler or
Yeah.
someone like that? What if they were shooting out tweets to their minions and things? You know, it's
Yeah,
our technology it's got the amazing capacity for good and the amazing capacity for bad in the wrong hands.
yeah, it's weird. Like I said, when you put it like you tie them both into that, because I think like because obviously you go with the old adage of like history repeats itself, which is 100% true.
Oh,
So you're
yeah.
just kind of waiting. Like it's different. Like we have technology, but the themes of humans will carry on, and that could happen in 20 years, 50 years, 250 years, whatever
Sure.
that might look like. So it's just it's I think when people like really dissect like the overall themes of stuff and not just the, like I said, the knee jerk reactions, and
Yeah.
it's like, okay, there's a lot of entanglement here with how this works, and we've seen this play out before. Maybe, like I said, horse and buggy. Now it's with electric cars or rocket ships or whatever.
It's funny. One of the things I mentioned that people get a kick out of is that, history does repeat itself. And a lot of times it's cyclical, and people
Yeah.
people are kind of shocked by that. For example, here in Plattsburgh, we had a trolley car system. In fact, the trolleys would have gone right past your front door here on Bridge Street. It was put in 1895, and it was ripped out in the late 1920s. So for over 30 years, you could hitch a ride on a Plattsburgh trolley car, take you anywhere you needed to go for between 5 and 25 cents. Okay. And in today's era of reusable energy, renewable energy, people were all talking about electric cars. These were electric trolleys over 100 years ago, and they ripped it all out. So it's funny how the history kind of repeats itself.
And similarities too. You take like the Clinton County transit buses, the same idea, like public transportation through, and it's like so the idea hasn't changed. So it's like public and transportation, but it's like how it's being done. So like that's why if you really go down to like those like basic levels of how things are being done, it's like you can build off of that and kind of tweak it however you want. Like, and could you give like public, and like it goes back to horse and buggy, but could you do like public, horse rides places, like even though it's transportation, but it's older. I know it's kind of like a weird thought because you're going back, like you said, to electric. Could you go back to?
You could go back to electric trolleys. I mean, some communities have done that just with cutting edge, clean electricity, and they're going back to this 100-plus-year-old technology.
When you see history change, and I'm going to use the idea of Margaret Street right now. Margaret Street's obviously getting a big facelift. And now, so you're taking things that are different, and Margaret Street, as we know it, is going to look not glaringly different. It's going to look slightly different than what we knew even last year. When you see stuff change, do you like when history modernizes? Does it like tug at your heartstrings I wish they didn't do that, and they kind of kept the original? Or like how do you feel about change in that regard?
It depends. It depends on if it's done in a way that's sensitive to, the context and the surroundings and the historical significance, or if it's done in just some kind of willy-nilly, for example, when they built the Arnie Pavone parking lot, a lot of people had no idea, but the original granite curbing from the Witherell Hotel, which was built just after the Civil War, was still there beside the sidewalk. It was in the grass, but the curbing was still there. They ripped that all out with heavy equipment and threw it in the back of a dump truck and built a parking lot. Like, no regard was given because they had no clue. They didn't know what that was. It was just some rocks, and they just dug it up. So I think in a lot of cases it's better to slow down and take stock of what kind of inheritance we have before it's wiped clean. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's tough because again, that goes back to. I mean, you obviously have an appreciation for history, and like I think some people now we get like, even if it's maybe not history to us, but maybe it's more nostalgia of like,
Sure.
I remember it that way, and when then it gets changed, it kind of messes with us because that's what we knew.
Mm-hmm.
But if we go back to, like you said, back with the trolley cars, that gets ripped out in the 1930s. I don't care about it. But the people back in 1930 probably cared about it because it was part of their history or part of their nostalgia. So that's where I kind of go back to like, it's always tough with change because some people want to like hold on to it, but I think they hold on to it because it's something they value or it's something that's consistent or, and again, if it's something that came when you were a child, could you have equated that to maybe memories with your parents or memories with friends or whatever versus... Like you mentioned Catherine Gardens, like my wife went to Seton, so she has memories of Seton.
Yeah.
Like even though it's the same building, it's been totally redone. So her thing of like changing it would be like, but like there goes my science classroom and the hallway and the cafeteria and the gym. And so there's a different level where if that got changed, I'm like, I don't care because I never went to Seton. So like I don't care if that building gets changed. Like modernize it because it makes a better use than what it was.
Yeah.
But I totally get it. Like and being a Shazy guy, you hear about the old school.
The
and
old
like,
school.
people talk about
My dad and my grandfather both went there.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. The guy that actually coined the term nostalgia, the scientist or whatever he was that coined the term, he actually originally came up with that concept as a mental disorder. This fixation and this longing for the past. You know, he didn't quite understand it. You know, and he thought it was a mental disorder.
I mean, it's definitely a mental thing, but it's a mental thing of, I would assume, like some level of loss, right? Because I mean, people talk about most people have stronger emotions to losing something than they do to gaining something. Meaning, or stronger feelings, towards they don't want to lose something versus they'd rather gain something.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was a good, I'm actually reading a book and they talk about getting rid of clothes. And getting rid of clothes is often hard for people because they build up this like whatever for it. And they said that if you said to get rid of clothes you already have, that's harder to do than if I said you can pick out any new clothes or outfit you want. You'd be like, yeah, but I don't want to get rid of the clothes I have. And it doesn't really make any sense because you can get you can get brand new clothes that are more in style and they're, maybe fit you better or are better at, I don't want to say technology, but like have evolved from style.
Yeah. You don't want to wear something from 1975.
Yeah, but I want to keep my high school soccer championship shirt. But it's like, yeah, but you can get rid of that and you can get like a really cool, like high quality, whatever modern fabric material shirt that looks way better, performs way better, cleaner, all these million things. We're like, yeah, but I don't want to lose that. And I think most people would probably have that argument or would have a harder time getting rid of those old outfits versus something that I'm like, you could get this tailored to you and you'll look great in it and it'll be so comfortable. But I think that's because it's the loss of something you have.
So some say that those fixations, those human attachments to objects can actually lead to hauntings in a sense.
Okay.
Because people put their energy into an object, or they fixate on an object to the point where it actually has some of their energy attached to it in some way. And some people believe that there are actually haunted items. Like if you bring something into your house that has some former owner's attachment to it, that it has some bad mojo associated with it.
Yeah, I try not to get fixated on too many, especially as I've gotten older. I'm sure, I guarantee there's probably still stuff if I went through like my parents' house and found old stuff, I'd be like, oh my God, because like it's pulled at you. But I think like recently, most stuff I could probably get rid of because I try not to have an attachment to things.
Right.
Certain things, yes, like if it's super important to me, mostly now it has to do with my kids or not a whole lot with, I know it sounds weird, not a whole lot with my wife because we kind of experience it at the same time, but like kids to me are different. Like I don't value really any photo of my wife where I'd be like, crushed if I lost it or something. But if I like lost a picture of my kids forever, like that would sting me more, but again, it's kind of like it's an example of a loss versus a gain thing, which is I don't know. It's like it's just weird concepts. But I think nostalgia's, it's all mental. I mean,
yes, sure.
But again, your mental drives your physical, and so it's like it's tough. Last question I want to ask you before we wrap this up.
Sure.
Have you started a podcast yet? I know I bring
You've
this
asked
up
me
every
that
time.
like 2 years in a row. Yeah, no, not yet.
Is it something? I mean, is it something you're not really into?
No, I
'Cause feel
definitely.
Like you could crush a podcast.
If there's anything I can do, it's talk. So I would love to do something.
I think
like that.
every time you come on, I'm just going to bug you because I'm like, if you go into like the winter and it's a slower time, and you just start doing this, it's like, and I go with. Have you ever? I mean, I think we talked about this before, but Hardcore History with Dan Carlin.
I've heard some episodes of that.
But I mean, I don't know how many he puts out, but I mean, there's not a lot. But now he's got a group of people that help him with it.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you're like, I'm just going to dive into something and put out one really long episode a month and do it for like 6 months, and then you could like put a couple little small like little factoids in there. But like, I think just like I don't know. I still think if you do like a multi-part 10-hour episode based on one specific thing,
do a deep dive.
I mean, dive where it takes you a month just to get a bunch of stuff. And it doesn't have to. It's not like you're doing a live presentation. You could plan it out. Like, I'm going to talk about these 10 stories on this section of this podcast, and then put out like a longer form thing and try to do like one every month or two. But it's like a really thought out.
It's a great concept because there's plenty of stuff that I get sucked into that are just fascinating topics that I never have a chance to talk to about on the tours or to an audience. So it would definitely be a good outlet for that. Yeah,
I just think you'd be good because you got obviously, I mean, like what you do in front of people is actually harder than talking in a mic. But I'm saying, but you can do that so well that it's such an easy transition. It's not like you're going from
drunk people.
Yeah. It's also like you're not
people.
Like I would say, just talking in a room by yourself to a mic is less like nerve wracking than I got to public speak in front of a bunch of people and like we talked about like watching people and because you're doing multiple roles.
Oh, you are multitasking all the time.
And there's stuff on your head that people don't even know about. Like, you're like, are people following along? Are they talking? Is everybody staying safe? Is like, is there
arranging the crowd when you stop so that everybody can see and hear you?
Yeah,
all that. A lot of different variables.
I still think a podcast would kill it because you got a big following, and I think just like putting that out there, because you put something out there at one point about a podcast, and I think it was a lot of people were like, you should do it, and I'm still gonna annoy you every time you come on. It's like, is that podcast up and running yet? I just think it's fascinating, especially if you pick little pockets either locally or even going out regionally or even just in general. Just I'm going to talk about the Wright brothers, like you said, and you just know
paranormal,
or even just that because people love that kind of stuff.
Oh my god,
or thematically, like, but. Yeah, that's it. That's my plea of 2023 for you to start a podcast.
All right.
And Matt, anything else you want to plug? I know this should be out either later today or tomorrow, so you should be still before Halloween. Yeah,
there's still plenty of opportunities to jump on one of our ghost tours before the big day, All Hallows Eve. We've got tours coming up Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday before the big day. And I think we're doing at least 2 or 3 tours a night. So plenty of opportunity. But don't wait because they usually do fill up. And it's always fun to see people come out and experience, what's lurking in your own backyard.
Well, Matt, always a pleasure. And like I said, I appreciate you fitting the time in right before. This is basically the Super Bowl of your year. So I appreciate you giving us the time. And but again, folks, we'll put some stuff in the show notes. But Matt Boire, tour director, Greater Adirondack Ghost and Tour Company, episode 248. I did say before we went on, I said 24/7. That was last podcast. Which was that? It's been kind of like but 2 times 2 doubled is 4, 4 doubled is 8.
There you go.
248. Yeah. I don't know. That's weird math. But that's it. Episode 248, Gale and Trombley Show. We're out. Thank you for listening to the Gale and Trombley Show. Be sure to subscribe, review, and share the episode. You can follow me on all social platforms at Gale and Trombley. Thanks for listening.